Senator, I was not involved in that decision, but the committee looks at.
I assumed you would say, yes, I will reconfirm it immediately so we can let our public health experts and doctors know what flu to have next fall.
As I understand it, the committee members and the scientists at the FDA, the career professional scientists at the FDA, look at the recommendation of the International GIP group, and they say, okay.
You just told me that you were going to reevaluate it, and I want to know what you are reevaluating it on. What are you looking at to make a decision, whether to reconvene it?
In conjunction with the center director of the Biologics Center, I would reevaluate which topics deserve a convening of the advisory committee members on VRBPAC and which may not require a convening. Obviously,
so what would we base our decision on?
Well, you can ask the Biden administration that chose not to convene the committee meeting for the COVID vaccine booster.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today. Let me follow up on that because last week I sent you a letter along with some of my colleagues asking you about the FDA's cancellation of that Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting. For everybody's information, this is a meeting that takes place annually for at least 30 years to make recommendations on which influenza strains should be included in the flu vaccines for the upcoming flu season. And for the first time in decades, FDA canceled that meeting with no explanation given, no new date chosen. That is, I believe, unprecedented and dangerous. And you just referred to it, Dr. Makary. In 2022, you raised concerns when the FDA was considering not holding a vaccine committee meeting to authorize COVID-19 boosters for kids 12 to 15. And at the time, you said it was, quote, unconscionable and undermined the integrity of the FDA's standard process to not hold that committee meeting. So if you are confirmed, will you commit to immediately reschedule that FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting to get the expert views? We need to know those so we can have the correct vaccine for the upcoming flu season.
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and I appreciated our time together in meeting ahead of this hearing. I was not involved in that decision, and what I would say is
you will immediately reconvene it.
I will immediately reevaluate which sessions, the leadership of that center, which decisions, which topics could benefit from.
What goes into a reevaluation? This is done every year, so we know what flu vaccine to have. What are you reevaluating?
First of all, for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been following it, they simply adopt verbatim the recommendation of the International GIP group. But I was not involved in that decision. I will say that there, in my opinion, was a huge difference between requiring every 12-year-old girl in America to take an 8th COVID booster shot versus rubber stamping a recommendation from the International GIP group, which has done 7 out of the last 7 years. I'm not saying that the decision is something I was aware of or involved in, but it's certainly something I will look at if confirmed.
Okay, I'm very unclear because the FDA is the gold standard for all of us. And this committee hearing is what has always been what we look to, the FDA look to, the American people look to determine what the flu vaccine is. What are you going to look at to make a determination and figure something else out now decades into this? What are you re-looking at?
Senator, I was not involved in that decision, but the committee looks at.
I assumed you would say, yes, I will reconfirm it immediately so we can let our public health experts and doctors know what flu to have next fall.
As I understand it, the committee members and the scientists at the FDA, the career professional scientists at the FDA, look at the recommendation of the International GIP group, and they say, okay.
You just told me that you were going to reevaluate it, and I want to know what you are reevaluating it on. What are you looking at to make a decision, whether to reconvene it?
In conjunction with the center director of the Biologics Center, I would reevaluate which topics deserve a convening of the advisory committee members on VRBPAC and which may not require a convening. Obviously,
So what would we base our
during,
decision on?
well, you can ask the Biden administration that chose not to convene the committee meeting for the COVID vaccine booster.
I get that, I understand. But I'm asking you, how will we know what flu to take next year, vaccine, if this committee doesn't reconvene and make their recommendation?
Senator, I was not involved in that decision not to convene that group.
I thought you would say, yes, we're going to reconvene, so who knows what's coming. Let me just ask you really quick, also following up on a question on mifepristone, because FDA does play a really critical role in making sure we have safe and effective medications. Contraception and medication abortion have been approved by the FDA for many, many decades based on mountains of high-quality evidence and expert scientific judgment. So if you are confirmed, will you commit to upholding the science and evidence-based drug approvals for all FDA-approved products, including contraception and medication abortion?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murray. You have my commitment to follow the independent scientific review process at the FDA, which is a tried and true process and that has been around. And so that is my commitment to you, Senator.
Okay, well, I want to be clear. There have been over 100 high-quality studies over more than 2 decades backing up the science and safety of mifepristone. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Paul.
Congratulations, Dr. Makary, on your nomination. And I think one of the most important things we need in government are people who are open-minded. I think closed-mindedness, the idea that this is settled and no one will ever, if you see data as the FDA and you have to make a decision, are you willing to lead where the data and the facts take you as opposed to your preconceptions?
Absolutely, Senator Paul. I think it is part of being a scientist. We need more humility in the medical establishment. You have to be willing to evolve your position as new data comes in.
The people who aren't involved in science think that, there's settled science and this is, it's just all settled and we should just all be quiet and submit to whatever settled science is. But you mentioned to me on the way in that yesterday you removed a gallbladder through the laparoscope. I was in medical school and surgical training, about the time where everybody made a 4 or 5 inch V incision to take the gallbladder out. And the older surgeons, the consensus, they ran the surgery departments. They were like, it's malpractice to use these tiny incisions and blow the air into the abdomen and do all this. But it took an overcoming of the consensus. Do you remember some of that? It might have been a little after your time, but you remember some of the transition from the larger incision to the small incision and the resistance of the consensus?
Oh, yeah, Senator. I can tell you some of the surgeons who trained me said things like, big surgeons use big incisions, and the bigger the incision, the better. And, without having a big open incision, you can't really see what you're doing. And I would point out that a laparoscope gives you 10 times the magnification. But there's a lot of medical dogma that has contaminated our field, and I think it's tied to a lack of humility. Ultimately, what makes a great doctor, in my opinion, as I teach my residents, is not how much you know, it's your humility and your willingness to learn as you go from patients.
I think some people here also are not duly impressed enough by what it takes to do the kind of surgery that you do. Now, I'm an ophthalmologist, and I do eye surgery, and we do really tiny incisions. But our surgery lasts between 5 and 20 minutes a lot of times to take the cataract. How long does it take to do it? You've done Whipple's, I imagine, which is a surgery on the liver. How long does a Whipple surgery take? What's that? I thought you did Whipple's too.
So Whipple's, yeah, I've done a lot of Whipple operations and islet transplant procedures, and then pioneered a new type of procedure, which is a laparoscopic pancreas islet transplantation, with hopes that it can someday be used to cure diabetes. It was about 8 hours for that operation when we started. We've gotten it down to about 4 or 5 hours, and we've done some laparoscopic Whipples in 3 hours.
With regard to the vaccine committees, and they talk about whether they meet or they don't meet and things, and there have been some questions, and one of the questions that I've been bringing forward is whether or not there could be a conflict of interest. And one of the things I've asked, and you would think it would be universally accepted by everyone without question, is you should have to reveal if you get royalties from drug companies. So if you're making a decision on a Pfizer vaccine or a Moderna vaccine, I would think the least transparency should be that you reveal, if you get royalties from those companies. Do you think we need to evaluate the people on the committees or see whether they get royalties or see whether or not there are conflict of interest for the people making these decisions?
Yes, I do, Senator. We need to review the ethics policy because people see things that appear to be a cozy relationship between industry and the regulators that are supposed to be regulating the products. Now, I want American companies to thrive. I want life sciences companies to thrive, but we need to call balls and strikes and to keep that independent scientific review process free of any conflicts. So I do think it deserves a look.
And really, I think it would be an area that a lot of people, once again, think there's a consensus. You either take all the COVID vaccines or not. Most of Europe doesn't recommend a COVID vaccine for under age 12. Almost all the countries don't recommend it for under 12, some under 18. And it's because they've looked at the risk-benefit for children of the vaccine and some of the possible complications of it. And it's different, frankly, for older people. And it's like, these are things that we should at least discuss and evaluate. Some of the most pro-vaccine people, when the policy came out to give boosters to your 6-month-old, said they wouldn't even give it to their 24-year-old a booster. Remember one of the famous committee members. 2 committee members left the vaccine committee because the CDC under Biden politicized the process and overrode the vaccine committee. So to insinuate that somehow there's some brand new thing going on, these are longstanding controversies. And I think that the main thing I'll go back to is in the beginning, we need open-mindedness, and I appreciate your willingness to look at the facts, the data, and not be overwhelmed by preconceptions.
Thank you, Senator.